Welcome to another edition of Sideline Sanity with me, Michelle Tafoya, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Give it a try. Call them, talk to them, find out what's in it for you. LegacyPMinvestments.com, LegacyPMinvestments.com. Going to tell you a little story here before we welcome our guest on. In June 2020, a gentleman by the name of Gordon Klein, a longtime accounting lecturer at UCLA, made the news. He made news because a student emailed him asking him to grade black students more leniently in the wake of the, quote, unjust murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. So Klein, this UCLA lecturer, responded, and this is part of his statement. Thanks for your suggestion in your email below that I give black students special treatment given the tragedy in Minnesota. Do you know the names of the classmates that are black? How can I identify them since we've been having online classes only? Are there any students that may be of mixed parentage, such as half black, half Asian? What do you suggest I do with respect to them? A full concession or just half? He went on. Remember that Martin Luther King famously said that people should not be evaluated based on the color of their skin. Do you think that your request would run afoul of MLK's admonition? And he signed it. And this is where the story gets really bigger. Klein's response, and I'm reading from an article here, Klein's response enraged students. They organized a petition to remove him that quickly gained nearly 20,000 signatures. I'm sure a huge portion of those signatures had no idea what they were signing, by the way, on a campus, resulting in the professor being placed on leave and banned from campus. But the story got national attention, and a counter petition signed by more than 76,000 people demanded his reinstatement. In less than 3 weeks, Klein was allowed to return to the classroom. Yet his encounters with what UCLA calls equity, diversion, and inclusion were far from over. Just under a year later, so less than a year later, Klein, the author of a textbook on ethics in accounting, was up for a merit raise. For the first time in his 40 years at UCLA, Klein said he had to submit a statement on equity, diversity, and inclusion. UCLA had adopted this as a promotion requirement in 2019, a promotion requirement, and now demands that all faculty members express how they will advance these principles in their work and how their mentoring and advising helps those, quote, from underrepresented and underserved populations, unquote. Klein inquired of the EDI office just what groups of students they meant. When they failed to reply, he wrote a dissent he made available, which reads in part, I find it abhorrent for the university to encourage faculty members to classify and prioritize students based on their group identities. I intend to continue helping all students equally, regardless of their backgrounds. Although his previous teaching evaluations were sterling and he had received prior merit raises, this one was declined. Klein has brought suit against UCLA. The struggle between Klein and UCLA represents a major shift in the mission of higher education in America. The principles, commonly known as diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, are meant to sound like a promise to provide welcome and opportunity to all on campus. And to the ordinary American, those values sound virtuous and unobjectionable. But many working in academia increasingly understand that they instead imply a set of controversial political and social views, and that in order to advance their careers, they must demonstrate fealty to vague and ever-expanding DEI demands and to the people who enforce them. Failing to comply or expressing doubt or concern means risking career ruin. One more paragraph. In a short time, DEI imperatives have spawned a growing bureaucracy that holds enormous power within universities. The ranks of DEI vice presidents, deans, and officers are ever growing. Princeton has more than 70 administrators devoted to DEI. Ohio State has 132. They now take part in dictating things like hiring, promotion, tenure, and research funding. Those are the words I've just read from an article by John Saylor. This appeared in the Free Press, Barry Weiss's publication, How DEI is Supplanting Truth as the Mission of American Universities. An obsession with diversity, equity, and inclusion threatens students, professors, and the very credibility of higher education in the United States. The author is John Saylor. He's a fellow at the National Association of Scholars. He tells this story, and we dig into it with him next.
For nearly 3 decades, she's reported the action from the sidelines. She started very young. She's covered the NBA, NFL, Olympics, and the college football and basketball national championships. And now, during these insane times in our world, Michelle Tafoya thinks we need a serious dose of sanity. This is Sideline Sanity with your host, one of the sanest people on planet Earth, Michelle Tafoya.
John Saylor, welcome. It's great to have you. I told our audience about your piece in the Free Press, which I found mind-boggling, and I also talked about this UCLA professor story. And when I read about DEI and this bind that it is putting students and professors in at the university level, I wonder, how far gone is this? Is the toothpaste so far out of the tube that we're done? What do you think?
You know, it's interesting because when people think about kind of campus free speech issues, when they think about political correctness run amok, usually a lot of people will talk about college students making demands on their universities, or professors saying something crazy, or individual actors. And what I try to highlight in my article is that we've kind of passed that stage. We're no longer at the stage where students necessarily shout people down, although that can happen sometimes. The main source of this kind of illiberalism that we see on campus is now primarily institutional policies that are written down and that usually come under the umbrella of DEI. So when you ask, how far gone are we? What I would say is that the campus politics of 6 years ago that kind of made news all over the place is now just institutional policy. And I think that's really concerning.
Is that a product of institutions responding to the campus politics and trying to stay ahead of it?
Yeah, I would say that there are two sides to this. So for a long time, universities and other institutions of higher education have pushed for a particular understanding of diversity, a particular understanding of social justice that I think really ultimately had an impact on the way students were taught. So prior to 2015, prior to 2010, there was a generally accepted way of viewing social justice. The emphasis on diversity was certainly well established, and it was understood in a very narrow way as merely racial diversity, and racial diversity often for its own sake. And students imbibed this in a way that they really took it to heart. But that meant that students ended up asking these institutions, why aren't you doing more? And a great example of that is this organization called White Coats for Black Lives, which started in 2014. But, not only was this organization far more radical than most universities have conventionally been, but it also effectively told a lot of medical schools, listen, you need to make these massive changes. And a lot of medical schools ended up establishing things like task forces to integrate social justice into the curriculum. So there's kind of a swinging motion where at first universities created these diversity offices and these diversity policies that affected the way students were taught. And that might not be the only reason students became kind of radicalized, but it was certainly one of the reasons that they became radicalized. And many of these radical students then solicited policies that universities accepted and embraced, and have now, now they've written this kind of radicalism into their basic operating principles.
And you can say, oh, well, this just ends at the university doors. But no, it doesn't, because if you have white coats for black lives, and I want to get into that a little bit more, it then filters out into the medical community. And we've seen some of these med schools demand, when a student is graduating, to sort of recite this proclamation of all the things they are biased against and accept their responsibility and all of that. And I asked my 17-year-old son, he's college bound, what if that were you? What if you had to sit there and repeat all that in order to become a doctor? And he said, I'd do it, and then I'd go be a doctor and forget about it. Well, I just feel like, okay, then what next? What will they ask for next? What will they ask for next? And academia isn't always right. And I think when you have an organization called White Coats for Black Lives, you're immediately assuming, oh, these are doctors. They're good people. They're virtuous. They just want to save lives. Give us a little bit more on this organization and how they operate, what they do, what their goals are.
So this organization was founded really in 2014 as the Black Lives Matter movement picked up and began. And for a couple of years, between 2014 and 2020, it was active as a student chapter organization. By the time 2020 rolled around, they had more than 70 chapters at medical schools all across the country. And then, of course, the summer of 2020 happened, and all across the country, activists took advantage of that moment to call for policies that institutions had a really hard time saying no to, but at the same time were way more extreme than, first of all, than we had really ever seen at institutions, but second of all, much more extreme than I think where most Americans would fall. I think that's certainly the case. And so this organization, they released a policy document explaining the kinds of things that they believe. And it's basically the full gamut of progressive identity politics written down. So they say that they believe the only way to solve for health inequities involves a major transformation of society that needs to include prison abolition. It needs to include police, defunding the police.
Right.
They say that they draw from the Black feminist socialist tradition, and pretty much any watchword of identity politics that you can imagine is contained in that document, which is really significant because when White Coats for Black Lives really made its push to change medical school policies, medical school after medical school agreed to their list of demands. And not only that, they often invited students from the organization to come sit down at the table and craft these far-reaching DEI plans.
I'm just not sure what defunding the police has to do with doctors. So we'll get into this a little bit more. Quick break. John Saylor, our guest. The piece, if you get the free press, great. If you don't, I highly recommend it. But you can follow him also on Twitter, John Sailer. How DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is supplanting truth as the mission of American universities. More in a second. So these are crazy times, right? Insane times. And you got to look in your cupboard and go, what if I ran out of fill in the blank? And you don't want to do that. But supply chain issues, the economy, all the uncertainty around us suggests that maybe I should have some food on standby. Some people call this survival food. And there is a company I'd like to recommend. It's 4patriots.com, the number 4patriots.com. This is not ordinary food. We've got beautiful breakfasts, lunches, dinners, hand-packed right in a family-owned company right in the United States of America, employing over 200 Americans. Delicious meals that are easy to prepare. And right now, go to 4patriots.com, use the code Michelle, Michele, 1L there, and take 10% off your first purchase of anything in the store, including this 3-month survival kit. You'll get their famous year-long guarantee after you order, plus free shipping on orders over $97. They're called 4 Patriots because a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and families. Just go to 4patriots.com, use the code Michelle to get 10% off. That's 4patriots.com, the number 4patriots.com, code Michelle. Start building your stockpile today. So, John, this reminds me also of the LA school district when they wanted to come back to the classroom after COVID or during the pandemic. That union wrote out a list of demands that included things like what you're talking about, abolishing prisons, defunding police, things that have nothing to do with getting your kid into the classroom. Similarly, as you just noted, with white coats for Black lives, demanding universities adopt these policies or say, this is what we'd like to do. Is it going too far to say this is cultural Marxism?
I might not use that exact term, but I understand why you would gravitate toward it, because the way that these organizations operate really do have a lot of resonances with past radical movements, including the earlier Marxist revolutions, and you can see that pretty clearly when you look at what they actually advocate. The changes that they actually advocate. So, for instance, one of the medical schools that responded to White Coats for Black Lives with a list of policy changes was the University of Michigan's medical school, Michigan Medicine. And, the organization, White Coats for Black Lives, they said, we would like you to institute a curriculum based on the principles of intersectionality and critical race theory. What did the medical school do? They said, okay, we are going to institute a curriculum and hire trained critical race theorists to come in. And that will now be a part of our required curriculum for all students. They even said that for their medical residents, the curriculum will be based on Ibram Kendi's work, which is a really telling statement of values. And this isn't just like an instance where I'm labeling something critical race theory because it kind of has some of the themes that were elucidated by critical race theorists. This is literally saying we should take these critical race theory scholars whose work they will acknowledge is rooted in Marxism, is rooted in Marx, and they say we should put this right into medical students' curricula. I mean, that's a really remarkable move by any medical school, but it's actually not that uncommon, which is what's crazy.
That crazy is a good word, because again, what does this have to do with medicine? What I want from a surgeon, from a general physician, from any kind of medical provider is for them to solve my medical issue. And to suggest that critical race theory has anything to do with anyone's health situation is mind-boggling to me. But this is a movement, I think, to infiltrate all professions. So we're going to probably see this moving into law schools. I can only imagine. And I just wonder what we have to do to stop it. Because it seems to me to be ruining things. I interviewed a nurse a few months ago. She had a 39-year career. And at her hospital, there was a new policy where she had to take this DEI test basically online. And at the end, click a box that said, I acknowledge I am biased. I am culturally, this and that. And she said, I'm not clicking this box. And they said, come on, just click the box. If you want to keep your job, you just got to click the box. She said, I'm not clicking the box, because then what are you going to want to ask me next to click the box on? Well, she lost her job. Now, she ended up finding other work. Thank goodness for her. But I don't know that many people are going to have the courage to say, I'm not clicking that box. So what do you make of this requirement to say, yes, I am all of these things that you say that I am, even though you don't believe that you are?
That's a really important point that I think is worth dwelling on. Pretty much in any discipline, that I looked at while I was reporting for this piece. There were I could find kind of written requirements to express your commitment to these vague values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this happens with faculty jobs in every discipline. So I just published an article about how biologists were required. I've published 2 articles in the last 2 weeks about how biologists have been required to submit statements on their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how the departments that solicited those statements heavily weighed them throughout the application process. I mean, that's a big deal, and that's in a discipline you really wouldn't expect to find these requirements. But really, what I would emphasize is that these kinds of requirements are everywhere. They're required, for instance, you mentioned law schools. They're now, in order for law students to make law review, many law schools require them to submit a diversity statement. This is happening at Yale Law School. It's happening at Georgetown. It's happening at Penn. I've been told that it's basically the norm for what used to be called the top 14 law schools to require these diversity statements to get into a role where you are taking part in editing major legal scholarship. Right. The same goes for funding in scientific research. The national, or rather, the largest funder of physical sciences in the nation is the Department of Energy. And now the Department of Energy, for every grant it gives, requires the grant recipient to write a statement about how equity is an intrinsic part of the research they are conducting. And now some of these, it's often hard to tell how these evaluations are actually assessed, but at the very least, if they're assessed at all, that is a major statement of priority. And it's also, in many cases, a pretty obvious political litmus test because, of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion imply a very narrow set of ideological viewpoints. It's pretty obvious at this point that they're not just kind of neutral values that no smart, sane person would object to. They imply a set of values that instead are contentious, controversial, and that many people would object to. But now they're becoming a requirement for jobs pretty much across academia and beyond.
Yeah, what you just said is really important. Diversity, equity, inclusion, it's a narrow set of sort of radical beliefs. I want to dig into that more in just a second, because this is what's so important. I think when people hear diversity, equity, and inclusion, it all sounds very virtuous. It all sounds lovely until you really dig into what it actually means. Because equity and equality are not the same thing. I think the word equity has suddenly had a change. Either it's had a change in definition, or they don't realize what they're saying and where it leads. Maybe they do. I don't know. More on that right after this. How much money do you have? Seriously, not just in your pocket, in your piggy bank, but what do you have reserved for your retirement? This is so important, and everyone at every age should start thinking about saving for their retirement. But the issue becomes, oh my gosh, where do I stash that money? Because the stock market's all over the place. I don't know what that's going to do next. Savings account doesn't yield me very much. What about precious metals? When I shop for precious metals, I trust Legacy Precious Metals. And that's the only place that I trust. And I encourage you to go and ask them all of your questions. They are trustworthy, they are knowledgeable, and they are open to any question that you might have. Think about taking some of your money and tucking it away in a nice little comfortable bed that's only going to grow your money over time. That's what precious metals do for your retirement. See, gold is a hedge against inflation. It protects against a weakening dollar, and goodness knows the dollar seems to always be weakening. So get in touch with my friends at LPM, Legacy Precious Metals, and do it while there's still time. Remember 2008? Those who invested in gold saw big gains. Others lost their retirements. So go to legacypminvestments.com, download your free investor's guide, or speak to one of their IRA experts. So easy. 866-528-1903. 866-528-1903, or log on at legacypminvestments.com. So, John, I want you to get back to this thing that you just said, that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a narrow set of values. That how would you define that? Like, if you were to describe that narrow set of values to people who don't know about the real substance of DEI, what would you say?
I think you have to look at how they're applied in practice. And so I brought up those diversity statements. It's interesting to take a look at the way that, as far as we know, those statements are evaluated. And UC Berkeley happened to publish a rubric for evaluating faculty members' contributions to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. They add the B to the acronym.
Oh, now there's another letter. This is like the LGBTQRST movement. I mean, now they're adding more letters to this. Okay, go ahead.
And
belonging.
So they this rubric is very telling because at one point it says candidates should get a low score if they, and this is a direct quote, if they say they intend to ignore the varying backgrounds of their students and treat everyone the same. Now that to me is problematic on a couple of levels. First of all, I think that that's a good ideal to try to treat everyone the same.
I agree.
But second of all, even if for some reason I thought you should not do that, and I thought that you should not treat everyone the same, it's still the case that many people on very smart, principled grounds would say, I believe that. And so it's functionally a litmus test written into the diversity statement evaluation rubric. But here's the thing. I think that illustrates the broader point about DEI because that's relatively uncontroversial for people who work as DEI officers or advocates of DEI. I've even had people try to defend that part of the rubric, in conversation with me. Basically, what it comes down to is a commitment to race consciousness. And I think the concept of race consciousness is perhaps the most fundamental the most fundamental element of DEI. DEI can include a lot of different ideological components. It generally suggests a very narrow emphasis on the categories of race and gender and sex. And I think that, you can extrapolate from that all sorts of views on, say, transgender issues or on public policy issues like defunding the police. But at the very least, I think that DEI implies this idea of race consciousness, that it is important, that race is very important, that it is important to acknowledge or to prioritize race in virtually any kind of policy decision. And rather than striving for a world in which you treat everyone the same and you don't take their racial categories as very important, you should emphasize the importance of those categories.
And to what end? Like, what is this? To what end? How does this help? What does this do for people?
Yeah, I think that some of that comes back to this understanding of equity, where there are a lot of well-documented disparities in all sorts of ways that we measure well-being, and those are real. In a lot, according to a lot of measures, African Americans are do poorly in some areas. They suffer from different health problems that other populations don't. They suffer from, or they have admissions, college admissions scores that are different than what you would see for white people or Asian people. And so one of the impulses that I think drives the whole enterprise of DEI is to try to correct that by essentially fiat, to try to correct that by saying, first of all, this is a priori evidence of racism that these disparities exist. And second of all, because we strive for equity and not equality, what we really need to do is strive for through policy, arrive at a place where everyone is proportionally represented, even if that's not, even if we have to redefine what academic excellence is, or jettison the concept of merit, or simply, choose to treat people differently based on their backgrounds. I think that the idea that we should not treat everyone the same just flows out of the idea that we should actively try to correct for every disparity that exists, because every disparity is a priori evidence of racism. And that's something that I don't accept. I don't think that that's actually true. And I think that in the process of trying to do that, what they're really doing is, doing great damage to all of our institutions. And, I pay attention to higher education, certainly great damage to our institutions of higher education.
No question about it. I mean, what are we preparing people for? And by the way, the achievement gap I live here in Minnesota, in the inner city schools is massive. And I'm still curious as to why so little effort is made to raise the standards of those schools rather than just live with what they are. They want to throw more money at everything. That isn't always the answer. It's how money is spent. But it angers me because more than anything, John, I feel like it says to people of color, you are less than, you are not as capable of, and therefore we're going to lower the bar in order for you to catch up. And I would be insulted. I would be insulted by that. I grew up in an Hispanic household, and I'm a girl, I'm a woman. And so, if anyone had ever told me, we're going to make some exceptions for you because you're female or you're Hispanic, I wouldn't have accepted that. I don't want my kids to accept that. So this is so disheartening. Later on this week, we're going to be talking to Ilya Shapiro of the Manhattan Institute, who, along with Chris Rufo, is working on a way to get actual legislative change, in effect to minimize or disrupt this DEI. This umbrella movement, there are words that are coming to mind that I probably shouldn't utter, so I'm not going to. But how, in your assessment, do you think that's going to go? This certainly isn't going to be a fast fix. There is no fast fix for this. But are there solutions? Are you optimistic that there are solutions?
Well, my organization, the organization I work for, the National Association of Scholars, was somewhat involved in crafting the Manhattan Institute model legislation. We were kind of close collaborators in that project, and I think that that's an important first step. Whatever solution comes, it's not going to come from within academia. The incentives are not there for people to stand up against this kind of overreach. And they're not there, not only because there's social pressure against doing so. If you're a professor and you say that we should not add, a statement on equity to our department's webpage, you will most likely ostracize yourself from most academic departments. But that's social ostracization is kind of the punishment of a past era. Now, a lot of universities require that you demonstrate your commitment to DEI in order to get promotion or tenure. So there's a very real possibility that you could risk your job security by standing up. And I think a lot of administrators are in the same position, either by force of kind of social pressure or by kind of official policy, which means you need that outside pressure. We desperately need, for every state that can do it, to place immense pressure on the DEI bureaucracy and on people like university trustees and university regents. states appoint those positions, and they
Right.
appoint them to provide a certain level of accountability, because these are public universities, and they should be governed in a way that reflects in some sense the will of the public. And they certainly don't do that right now. I think whenever people hear about what I report on, overwhelmingly, they think it's crazy. Overwhelmingly,
Yeah.
I think normal people think that this stuff is crazy. And absolutely, states should make these kinds of efforts. But I'll say that's only the beginning, because what has happened in higher education is deeply, deeply entrenched. And even if we get the best case scenario with every line of the Manhattan Institute legislation passed, there will still be great, substantial problems with universities. So I think that lawmakers should view this not as the full package, but as the minimum, the starting minimum for university.
Starting point, yeah. This making someone write something that they don't believe in order to keep a job seems to me to be illegal. I would think that would be illegal. This is not the America that I was born into, and I don't want it to be the America I die in or that my kids have to live in. I really don't. This bothers me deeply. John Saylor, I loved your piece. I hope you'll come back again and discuss this more with us and all the other. Keep doing your reporting. It's so important, and I appreciate it so much. I wish you the very best as you dig into all of this and reveal it to everyone for what it is. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. It was great to come on.
He is John Saylor. I'm Michelle Tafoya. This is Sideline Sanity. Don't forget, more than ever, be brave and do good. Thanks for listening.